to be back with you guys this morning. I hope you guys had a good Thanksgiving. It was good for me. I got to go back home to Pennsylvania for a week, be with my family, so it was really nice. I heard that you guys really enjoyed Andrew, so I'm really glad that he could come and be with you guys and that you guys enjoyed him. He's one of my best friends, and so he'll probably come back in the future, so that'll be cool. And so the past 2 weeks, Andrew he continued our series through the Sermon on the Mount. He was covering verses 7 and 8. Blessed are the merciful and blessed are the pure in heart. Today we've reached verse 9, which reads, Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God. And each of these Beatitudes are different ways that Jesus says that we can be happy forever. And he's had some really weird things to say about this, and some things don't really make sense, like, blessed are those who mourn, and blessed are the meek, and blessed are the hungry and thirsty. All of these sound very countercultural, but then we dig a little deeper and find out really what Jesus is trying to get at when he says these things, and okay, they start to make sense. We get it. But I don't know if you've really noticed, but these last few weeks, they haven't been that weird. Blessed are the merciful. Okay, I can get behind that one. That's a good one. Blessed are the pure in heart. Okay, yeah, that makes me feel warm inside. I like that one. That's a good one. And today, blessed are the peacemakers. Definitely, absolutely. I agree with that. That's a good one. But actually, even though we may not be able to see it through our 21st century eyes, but I would argue that the one today, blessed are the peacemakers, is actually the most countercultural of them all. It's actually the most different out of all of them. You've probably heard this saying, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. A very famous saying. And the people that Jesus was teaching to, they lived by this saying. This is very important to them. See, Jesus actually introduced this new philosophy that you should do good to other people, even if they don't like you, even if they don't do good to you. He introduced that to the world. Before Jesus, nobody even dared to do that. That didn't even make sense. The practice of doing good for others, despite how they treat you, has Judeo-Christian roots. It comes from the teaching of Jesus. And actually, if you look a little further into the Sermon on the Mount, if you look at verses 38 through 42 of chapter 5, he actually goes more in depth about this. Starting in verse 38, it reads, You have heard that it was said, eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. As 21st century Americans, we can't even really imagine how countercultural this was for a Middle Eastern Jew to hear for the first time. Here we get a sense of what Jesus is saying when he says, Blessed are the peacemakers. It's interesting, in verse 41 it reads, If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2. What is he saying here? What does that mean? So in the Roman Empire, there were Roman soldiers everywhere, all over the Roman Empire, even in Israel, down at the bottom. And if you can imagine a Roman soldier, what they would look like, they've got all this armor, they've got probably a backpack, this giant pack on, they've got all of this gear. And so what they would do is, it was a law that if a Roman soldier asked someone to carry their pack for them, they had to do it. But they only had to do it for 1 mile. That was the law. And so the thing was, the Jews hated the Roman soldiers. But the Roman soldiers knew that. And so the Roman soldiers would specifically seek out the Jews because they knew that they would hate it. And so they would go, hey, carry my pack. And they'd be like, roll their eyes, okay, fine, I guess I'll carry your pack. And Jesus says, no, don't have that attitude about it. Don't roll your eyes and just do it begrudgingly. You should be happy, joyful to do it. And so he says, carry their pack, do it. But not just for 1 mile, do it for 2. Prove them wrong. Make them say something about you, like, there's something different about you. Why are you doing this an extra mile when you don't have to? Make them question your motives. In verse 9 of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus tells us, Blessed are the peacemakers. And he tells us how we should handle conflict. Thanksgiving was just a couple days ago, and you guys probably all came together with your families. And I'm sure that there was no conflict at all. All of your families, I'm sure, got along perfectly the whole time. There was no fighting. With all the kids, they all just got along perfectly and played together. I'm sure there was no conflict. Sometimes conflict arises. And Jesus kind of tells us how we should deal with that. So I'm an RA, a resident assistant at Ozark, and the third floor of one of the dorms, the guys' dorms at Ozark. And basically, my job is to just make sure that the guys are doing okay, just with schoolwork and with life, and to make sure that they're doing all right. But part of my job has to deal with conflict. And, conflict does arise, and even though it's a Christian college, stuff still goes wrong. And so I remember this one time, there were these two guys who lived across the hall from me. Their names Adam and Brad, and they're roommates, and they're freshmen, they're new roommates. And they're both fairly new Christians and pretty immature, just overall, and even in their faith, they don't really know exactly the whole everything. So they're figuring stuff out. And so Brad, this one day, was kind of wrestling through the idea that Christians are supposed to know why they are Christians. They're supposed to know what they believe. That's important. And I agree, that's great. You should do that. And he's kind of wrestling through this. And so he's talking to his roommate, Adam, about it, and he asked him, Adam, why are you a Christian? What do you believe? And Adam was kind of taken aback by the question, and he wasn't really sure how to answer it because he's still, pretty new to being a Christian. And so he got kind of flustered, and so he didn't really know what to say. But Brad pressed it. He was like, you need to know this. This is important. And it kind of made Adam uncomfortable, and so he just got up and left. And he got mad and got up and left. And Brad was just like, what? What did I do? What did I do to make him upset? And so he came to me and was like, what did I do? He explained the situation, and I kind of had to teach him that even though what you said was true, you didn't say it with a whole lot of grace. You need a balance of truth and grace. Even though you may think you're right, how you explain that you're right is everything. That is so important. This reminds me of 1 Corinthians 13. It talks about having love when you speak to others. It says, if I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but have not love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. You may be right, but if you don't do it in a loving way, if you don't explain it in a loving way, it means nothing. It means nothing. I think we could take this advice when it comes to conflict. When I say the word conflict, some different emotions probably rise to the surface, and how you deal with conflict. We all deal with conflict in different ways. Some of us, when conflict arises, we run as far away as we can. We don't want anything to do with it. No thanks. That's not for us. But then others may seek it out. You love a challenge. You want to be in conflict with someone. You want to prove them wrong. You want to be superior to them. What does the gospel say about how we deal with conflict? I believe the only way we can healthily handle conflict in a wholesome way is through the gospel. 2 summers ago, I was on a team that was called Camp Teams. And so what I did, I was on a team of 4 people, and we went around to different camps throughout the country, throughout the summer, and it represented my school. And so we were on a team. And through this summer, I learned how different people deal with conflict. Because when you're on a team with 4 different people for 8 weeks, there's going to be conflict. That's going to happen. And so the other guy on the team, his name was Dusty. And Dusty hates conflict. He really did not like it. With every part of him, he wanted to run away as far as he could from conflict. And so it was, I remember, probably like halfway through the summer, it was like about week 5, and he wasn't doing so good. He was kind of sad and wasn't really being himself. And so I asked him, what's going on? And I kind of had to talk with him for about like 30 minutes to try to help him, come to the conclusion of why he was sad. And this is what he said. He was like, 2 weeks ago, you said something that really hurt my feelings. And I was like, 2 weeks ago? Why are you telling me this now? And that was he told me that only after I had to talk to him about 30 minutes to get him to tell me that I hurt his feelings 2 weeks ago. He hates conflict with everything in him. So you have that extreme. You have people that are doormats. Just you can walk all over them. They don't want anything to do with conflict. But then you have the other extreme. You have the kind of person that seeks out conflict and that loves it. So 2 years ago, over the summer, my dad and I went to Canton, Ohio to see the Hall of Fame, Football Hall of Fame induction. And so my dad and I are Broncos fans. I hope you can forgive me for that. I know you guys are Chiefs fans. But Terrell Davis 2 years ago was being inducted into the Hall of Fame. He was this legendary Broncos running back, and my dad grew up watching him, and it was just really special for us to go and see that. And so we're sitting there, we're listening to his speech, and there's this guy like several rows back, and I mean he's like being a jerk, just shouting these things. I mean he's drunk, he doesn't know what he's doing, but he's just being a jerk, and he's saying you stink, you need to sit down, and like just being blatantly disrespectful publicly to Terrell Davis in the middle of his speech. And so after the first like 10 minutes, I mean we took it and we're just kind of like, okay, like you should shut up now. But then finally my dad just kind of had enough, and he stood up and he looked back and he was like, hey, you need to cut it out. You need to stop. And so he's like, oh. So he sat down and he sat in his chair for a few minutes. But then after a few minutes, he started making fun of us. He was like, hey, that guy right there, he's a loser. And he started calling us names, and it was like, what is this guy's problem? And even after the speech, it was the last speech, and so the whole thing was over and everyone kind of stood up. And he came up to us and started getting in our face. And I was like actually worried that he wanted to fight us, like genuinely concerned. And so we kind of just had to just say, okay, like we're sorry, we were wrong, like it's okay, go home, like calm down. And like we were really concerned. And so you have Dusty, my friend, who hates conflict. And then you have this guy at the Pro Football Hall of Fame who's seeking out conflict. He loves conflict. He wants a challenge. When you're non-confrontational and are afraid of conflict, you get trampled on, you get stepped on. And that doesn't lead to peace. That's not peacemaking, that's peacekeeping. That's not what Jesus is saying here. He's not saying be a peacekeeper, he's saying be a peacemaker, which is totally different. But when you love conflict and actually seek it out because you like a challenge, that definitely doesn't lead to peace because you're beating up the other person. Because you have to be superior to them. That's not how this works. That's not how peace works. What leads to peace is when you have the confidence to speak your mind and communicate how you feel, but at the same time respecting the other person's point of view. Again, you have to have truth and grace. You have to have love when you communicate how you feel. And we find that in the gospel. I want to go back to 1 Corinthians 13. Again, if you would, if you could turn there in your Bibles, we'll be there for a minute. And this chapter's really helped me a lot over the years when it comes to how I deal with conflict and how I deal with other people that I don't really like. One of my best friends, Paul, told me about this practice that he does whenever he just cannot stand someone. He turns to 1 Corinthians 13, and he reads verses 4 through 8, and with each sentence, he stops and reflects on whether or not he's doing a good job with that. So this morning, I kind of want to do that. This morning, let's read through 1 Corinthians 13, 4 through 8. With each sentence, with each phrase, I'm going to pause. What I want you to do with each phrase, I want you to replace the word love with your name. And so instead of love is patient, love is kind, I want you to replace it with your name. Tanner is patient. Tanner is kind. And reflect, am I doing a good job with that now? Especially with people that I don't like. So let's do that this morning. Verse 4. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It's not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. I feel like we can get lazy with that a lot. Jesus calls us to love everyone. And like when he says everyone, he doesn't just mean like some people, but like everyone. He really means it. We say, oh yeah, he means that, but that doesn't mean we have to be their friend. Well, actually, I think it kind of does. Actually, I think it means we have to be more than their friend. We have to love them. We don't just have to like them. We have to love them. That's such a challenging concept. How do we deal with people who are different than us? How do we deal with people who look different than us? How do we deal with people who have different beliefs than us? Do we ostracize them? Do we exclude them from everything? Do we run as far away as we can from them? Do we look down on them? Religion leads to a superiority complex, looking down on others because of how righteous you are compared to others. But that's not how the gospel works. That's not how that works. The gospel leads to humility and peace. Dietrich Bonhoeffer writes in his book, Life Together, he says that the beginning of Christian community is sitting next to someone who you don't like or is different than you, because it's good for you. It's good for you to do that. It doesn't matter what your race is or what your background is. It's for everyone. Everyone. Did you know that Christianity was actually the first multi-ethnic religion? It was the first multi-ethnic religion. All religions before were products of their culture. What would happen is if you were born into a certain city or tribe of people, you just kind of adopted their god. That's just how it worked. And each tribe kind of had their own god. That's just, people just accepted it. You were born into this tribe, okay, you're going to worship that god. That's how this works. But then Christianity came along and said, no, our God is the God. And you should worship him too. And then it just spread like crazy. It spread like crazy. It was revolutionary. And so now you have all these different people coming together just for the cause of Christ. You have people in North Korea, and Canada, and China, and Kenya, and even in Madison, Kansas, coming together to worship Jesus Christ. That's special. We need to embrace our differences. We even see this in Jesus' own disciples. Jesus put Simon the Zealot and Matthew the tax collector on the same team. See, the Zealots were this group of people in the time that hated Rome. They wanted Israel to be separate from Rome. Because Israel was in the Roman Empire, it was considered a part of Rome, and they thought it needed to separate. They hated Rome, they despised it. And that was Simon. Simon was a zealot. And then you have Matthew, who literally worked for Rome. He was a tax collector for Rome. And they were on the same team. They didn't agree on anything except Jesus. They both believed in the Son of God. Think about the things that could be accomplished if we were to be unified under the cross of Christ. Unity is the power of the church. If the entire church could unite, it would be an unstoppable force. We have all of these different denominations and all these separations. Do you think that's what God intended? I don't think so. Imagine if we could just unify under one thing, Jesus. We would be unstoppable. At the end of John chapter 16, Jesus reminds his followers that they will have a power stronger than the power that he had. That they will have the Holy Spirit inside them. That they would have nothing to fear. They could do anything. And then skip ahead, the beginning of chapter 18, he turns his face to the cross and it says, because he spoke these words, he was compelled to go into the Garden of Gethsemane, where he would be arrested, where the mob of people were waiting to persecute him. So what happened in between John 16 and 18? What happened in John 17? Jesus prayed his final public prayer. When someone is moving towards death, you pay attention to what they say. You pay attention to their last words. The last words are important. There's a synthesis going on in them, and the most important thing in their life is bubbling up to the surface. And you listen to the last few things people say before they die. And Jesus prayed in between John 16 and 18. His last prayer, the last things that he would say before was crucified was a prayer. And the last thing that he said, he prayed for you and for me, for all of us in this room, that we would be unified. The very last thing that Jesus said before he died was that the church would be unified. That's pretty important. When Jesus prayed for unity, the evil one said, oh no, anything but that. Satan doesn't want unity. He's fine with the way the things are now. He likes division because that slows things down. But unity is what we need to seek for. Jesus calls us to stop arguing, stop finding things to disagree on. If you want to know how we should deal with people that are different than us, just look at Simon the Zealot and Matthew the tax collector. They found commonality in the gospel. Even though they had nothing in common. They agreed on nothing but one thing, Jesus. It's okay to disagree with people. If you don't agree with someone politically, or you don't have the same color skin as them, or if you don't have the same amount of money as them, that doesn't mean that you have to avoid them at all costs. That's not what that means. Because Jesus calls us to do the opposite. In 1998, a guy called Dale Carnegie published a book called How to Win Friends and Influence People. It was a hit. It was this huge book. It was a New York Times bestseller, and everyone was talking about it. But basically, to sum up the whole book, sold over 1 million copies. This one book can be summed up in one sentence. And this is what Dale Carnegie comes to in his book. People like people who are like them and that like them. People like people who are like them and that like them. Gee, I think that's probably true. I mean, look at all of us, we're pretty similar. Think of the people that I'm friends with, we're all pretty similar. We naturally gravitate to people that are just like us. And Jesus says that's easy. Anyone can do that. Any non-believer can do that. I'm calling you to something bigger than that. Seek out the people that are different than you and disagree with you, and befriend them and love them because they're your neighbor. That's what he calls us to do. We can only achieve this kind of unity when we handle conflict in a healthy way. When we become peacemakers. Because the right side up kingdom says, do whatever makes you comfortable. Be friends with those that are just like you and that like you. That's what Dale Carnegie says. But the upside down kingdom says, no, stretch yourself. Seek out the people that are hard to deal with. Seek out the people that aren't like you, that disagree with you. Because ultimately that is how we will find unity. In the church and outside of the church. That is the way of the upside down kingdom. Let's pray. God, I pray for unity in the church. I pray for unity in this church. I pray that whenever we are confronted with difficult people and people that we don't necessarily like, that we would be convicted to love them. Not just tolerate them, but love them. Help us deal with conflict in a healthy way. Help us to share how we feel, but help us to share how we feel in a loving way. And thank you for being the example for us, that we can seek unity. Thank you for your prayer. Thank you for your last words for unity. It's your name I pray. Amen.
Our decision.